Hi, I'm Mark Despotakis. I'm the Director of Market Development at Progressive Music, and I'm also the Chair of the PMEA Council, the Pennsylvania Music Educators Association Council, that handles advocacy and public policy. And today we are here at the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and we are joined by Secretary of Education Pedro Rivera. Secretary Rivera, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure to be here today.
We're going to be talking about arts education, but before we do that, I want to kind of go to a 30,000-foot level and talk a little bit about you and where you've come from. So you've been here about 18 months now, coming from a role as a superintendent. So what's been your experience so far working here at the department? How does that differ from perhaps being at the school district level?
Very different. I've had an opportunity through my career to be a classroom teacher and administrator in an urban district, last being the superintendent of schools in Lancaster. So now coming to the Department of Education, I've had an opportunity to engage with so many different stakeholders. So serving school districts that serve children in rural communities, urban communities, suburban communities, really dealing with a diverse student population and community population, whether socioeconomically, in terms of racial diversity, in terms of diversities of experience. So I think it's been a very enriching experience where I've gotten to meet some great educators, great kids, great families, while also at the same time trying to tackle some big issues for the Commonwealth.
Sure, and we're going to get into some of those,
Absolutely.
especially as they relate to some federal things. But let's talk about music and arts education. So do you have any experience, kind of as background in arts education?
So not as an educator. I, as a dad, very much so. I have a 12-year-old and a 5-year-old. My son actually plays in his school band. He's a percussionist. He plays the drums, which makes for some very interesting nights at home while he's practicing. And I have a 5-year-old who wants to follow in her brother's footsteps and likes to bang on everything and anything in the home.
2 drummers in the house.
So 2 drummers in the house. My wife is a vocalist, and I try. Usually without much success, but. My experience, has been as an educator, at the secondary level at high school, actively engaging and being involved in, both production and with some great educators serving kids.
So then from your role working at different levels of education, to you, what does a good music and arts program look like?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I think it's important to really recognize the value of art and music education, of humanities education across multiple grade levels, elementary school, middle school, and high school. I think first and foremost, it's an opportunity to differentiate around the needs of students, to really create multiple pathways of not only interest for kids, but also multiple pathways of learning. I've learned, if you've ever witnessed or viewed music instruction, students practice until there's practically 100% accuracy. And there is no other instructional topic, out there where, there's an expectation of 100%, whether you're a soloist or you're accompanied by 50 other individuals, which we see in many, large, bands and orchestras. So first and foremost, I think, what's extremely important is that the educator, much like most great educators, know their individual students, know the skills of their individual students, the level of support and practice needed for those students. They have to fully understand how to engage multiple stakeholders, kids who have varying interests, varying experiences, and varying resources at home. While at the same time working hard, especially nowadays, to become part of the broader and greater education community. And I think in districts where we see great programs, we see that great music and art educators are pretty much at the center of that.
One of the buzzwords in the last few years of many in the education world has been differentiated instruction, and it's pretty obvious that a music classroom especially is a perfect example of differentiated instruction that you're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, whether you have 1 student in a classroom or 3 students playing 3 different instruments in the classroom, you can quickly point out who's on tune, who's not on tune, who needs a little more practice or who doesn't, and the music classroom, art classroom is a great place to see that.
So the concept of a C being an average score doesn't quite work at a band concert.
At a concert, when you're an educator, you see lots of, C and D performances, and they tend to stand out a little.
Right. So let's go again to kind of a bigger level of education. We're living through a sea change right now of education with this new federal education law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which replaces No Child Left Behind reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So tell us how Pennsylvania is taking on ESSA, because one of the roles from the federal law is more implementation at the state level and state decision making. So what's happening here in Pennsylvania?
So ESSA provides us an opportunity to really engage in transforming education in the Commonwealth. So we started really, looking at our accountability systems and support systems in the in PA much sooner than the actual authorization of the Every Student Succeeds Act, because we understood that the best way to create an environment that really values teaching, that values student success, we had to look at how we were holding schools accountable, how we were measuring success across the across 500 plus school districts. And by looking at those accountability systems, we found ourselves with an opportunity to bring in multiple stakeholders. I mean, we've engaged hundreds of stakeholders in this conversation around support and accountability. Part of that, we're really proud to share that, there are art educators that are involved as part of that discussion. So we saw this early on as an opportunity to really bring together the education community to really drive the path forward to better, serving students and communities at large. So ESSA has provided us an opportunity to formally engage in that process federally. And I'm very proud of the Commonwealth to be at the forefront, pretty much blazing a trail around community engagement, stakeholder involvement, and trying to come up with a process that best represents our students.
And as all the 50 states are going through this, we've had, for those of us who follow the education trade magazines, there's been talk about Pennsylvania is in many ways on the forefront of doing this with the stakeholder groups.
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, having a governor who's really engaged, involved, and supportive of education, is a great opportunity for us. I mean, he has been actively and personally involved in building accountability and, of course, advocating for resources for schools. So he's been leading this effort. He's allowed us the opportunity to engage stakeholders. We also have a great teaching force here. I think folks tend to, really not appreciate the fact that in 500 school districts across the Commonwealth, we have some of the most amazing teachers educating our students. And they've been doing great work, for many, many years now. So this process allows us the opportunity to bring them to the table and, hear and steal from their best practice and try to use that as a model for success moving forward.
You talked a little bit about evaluation, and where that plays in with ESSA. Do we know where that's going to play in Pennsylvania with Act 82 and the teacher evaluation system? Is that known yet?
So it's not known yet, and of course we share the research. We know what best practice is. We know we've documented the feedback given to us by educators across the Commonwealth. But to be fair, what we shared is we brought together work groups, and over 60% of the work groups consist of actual practitioners, educators. And my promise to them is that this would be their plan, and they would drive the changes as part of this plan. So whereas I'm seeing trends and I'm hearing some great feedback, and I know what the research says and what our team has pulled together as guardrails. But why I've been reluctant to share publicly or specifically is because educators and stakeholders, industry partners, parents, business leaders, advocacy groups are coming together, and they're going to drive this plan. So for us, it's not just about the education plan. It's about a movement to improve education across the Commonwealth.
And a lot of that information, kind of the top-level stuff, is available on the website,
Absolutely. So
education.pa.gov.
a fully transparent process. So
right.
Anything we discuss, anything we share, we're posting online for every resident, not only in the Commonwealth, across the country, to see and provide feedback as well.
Great. So under ESSA, the kind of a huge news for us in the music education world is that music is listed as a well-rounded subject, which is this new word for a core subject. How do you see music and the arts fitting into where we go with this?
So in many different areas. So for example, as we look towards identifying multiple pathways to success, multiple pathways to graduation, we understand that there is no one cookie-cutter approach to establish and to identifying student success or educational success. And arts education are a big part of that. When you think of not only in factors of academics, although research shows that students, school districts, communities that really engage in music and the arts show systematic improvements not only in standardized tests but in life skills across the board. But we also know communities that really engage in high interest areas have better attendance, have better engagement, have a better identification as a community. So when we look at multiple measures to success or even multiple measures to graduation, well-rounded coursework, well-rounded educational opportunities will play a huge role in ensuring that our kids, as we like to say, they vote with their feet, ensuring that those kids are coming to school, staying engaged, and becoming members of their community.
And since Pennsylvania is very much a local control state when it comes to school districts, a lot of this is going to be on local school districts implementing that work. And my guess then is that just comes out once we see what the finalized plans are at the state level.
Absolutely. So first, as we've seen, the governor has fought really hard to put resources in place to allow school districts to finally stop reducing the number of opportunities, humanities opportunities that they're offering to their community. Secondly, they can choose the areas in which they're going to invest in, and by having that investment, by growing it organically, it'll be a much richer resource, much richer opportunity for their constituents. Lastly, by creating multiple measures, so I mentioned graduation rates earlier. I mentioned attendance as well. This all will fall within strategies that ensure students are coming to school ready to learn.
And even in the federal law, there's this talk about school climate and these things that music and arts programs do.
Absolutely, and there's discussion around the total education community. And, educators of art, music, and, humanities are a big part of that community.
So what's the best way that educators in the arts in Pennsylvania can ensure that they have a voice in this ESSA implementation?
Absolutely. So, proudly, we do have representation in our work groups of the arts community. And, they've been actively and very involved and engaged in advocating for their peers and for their occupation, for their mission in education. Secondly, art educators across the Commonwealth can continue to build and show accountability systems around success of students. I remember as a superintendent, as we were moving into this, this system of accountability, art teacher, I remember one art teacher, specifically who had a great lesson, and she could show the growth of students in her art class with one significant project, and it was drawing trees. And it was interesting. At the beginning of the unit, students would draw trees, and they looked like lollipops. So just a stick and a circle at the top of the tree. And then towards the end of the unit, you'd see this transition from creating leaves and creating stems and creating veins within the tree. And she would post this outside as a formative assessment to show how art education had really improved how students viewed art differently. So literally the transformation from a tree that looked like a lollipop to a tree that looked like a tree, told a story. And really, as you can compare how students grew in that project over the course of the unit was a very telling example of accountability in an arts classroom. The other, when you think about music, and as I used to visit music classrooms as an educator, to start, to create a baseline of where students are, whether it's instrumentally or vocally, and showing that growth over a period of time, even in something as simple, as complex, I should say, as reading music and understanding timing and tone and, and pitch. There's an opportunity there for educators, which they've really been, taking on over the course of the past, decade, but as I've seen over the past few years, where they are able to significantly show how students are growing, through their education, through their arts and music education, exponentially throughout the year. And I think so that's the second opportunity there. Lastly, I think it's important for us to remember that the arts and music communities are probably some of the most engaged and vocal communities, probably across the nation, but I can absolutely share across the Commonwealth. I mean, if you want to run into most of your neighbors or most of the members of a community, go to an art exhibit or go to music ensemble or a school play, and you will run into everybody and their grandparents. And so there's an opportunity there for us to utilize the arts as not only educational enrichment, but really community engagement as well. And that's also a big part of ESSA, and the opportunity that we have is to involve and engage the full community.
So it's important then for educators to remember that while this work is being done on the state level now, so many of these conversations will then kind of happen again at the school district level, and that's the perfect opportunity for them to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And by us engaging local stakeholders, by us really identifying local best practice, their current practice is going to become the future of education in PA.
So those of us in the arts community following this education stuff, this time around we're hearing all this stuff about Title I, and now we're hearing about Title IV. And how this money is going to be available for well-rounded education, which we're part of, and to help a school climate, which we're part of. So the question I think that educators out there want to know is, how do they learn what questions they should be asking when it comes to those types of things at the district level, and then where does that play into how that they can utilize that money if they're able to get it at that level? So what do you know at this point based on where we are federally and the state?
So of course, we're just working through federal negotiated rulemaking, and a lot of this is, being discussed now. But for us, why we've been, as transparent as we've been, and why we've been including and engaging, multiple stakeholders that represent our, our educators, both geographically as well as, the types of communities they serve. There's going to be local resources that they can tap, that they can ask questions of, to really engage in the conversation with. Secondly, by really making this information available to them online, but there's also the opportunity to ask questions. We have a website available. We have a email address available, to them to ask any questions they may have. But we're also listing who's represented as part of the work groups, so they can find someone locally, to engage, in this conversation with.
So we're gonna move off of ESSA, I promise. This is my last ask the question. So the timeline then is hopefully that we're going to see something out there for the public in the fall, and then implementation early next year. Is that?
Absolutely. So we should have something much better formatted and available to read through by fall. Of course, there's information out there now, so they can see the evolution of planning. So to speak, but we'll have information available to them, in the fall. We are also going to kind of take the show on the road, so to speak, and we're going to be having geographically, dispersed listening and engagement tours. So we're going to take that information and go out to our communities to discuss, their thoughts.
Fantastic. So let's move on to a very much a state issue here, this funding issue. So without going too far into this, it's very well known that education funding in Pennsylvania is basically distributed in the most inequitable way in the whole country. So we have this new funding formula that's going to start correcting that, but it's only a small percentage each year, and there's good reason for that, obviously. But equity is still a major issue in music programs. So as we're transitioning here, what can be done to ensure equity of access to music programs?
Absolutely. First, as you mentioned, the work of the Basic Education Funding Commission is probably one of the greatest examples of government, that works that I've seen. Not only in this position, bipartisan, bicameral, two administrations. The governor championed and signed it. I mean, it's a great formula, and it's supported widely. Taking into account poverty level, taking into account the needs of rural districts and urban districts, taking into account the needs of English language learners. It's significant. So we've gone from one of 3 states having no formula to probably having one of the most progressive formulas and comprehensive formulas in the nation. So that's a big step in the right direction. But the formula is only as good as the investment made in education, which you just shared, which is why it's important, as the governor's been doing, and many of our members of the General Assembly have been doing, is advocating for additional resources. By making resources and funding available to the local school districts, they can best make the decisions that that meet the needs of their local constituents, of their community. And I think that's also a very important step in the right direction. 500 school districts across the Commonwealth, 1.74 million K-12 students in PA. From Harrisburg, we can't make a decision that's going to meet the needs of every single one of those constituency groups. But we can make the resources available that local municipalities, local school boards, administrators, and teachers can make the decisions that best serve their children. And that's, it has been the philosophy of the governor by putting the resources in place, but also building an accountability system to ensure that, we're utilizing those areas in the right way. We're utilizing those resources in the right way.
Arts and music teachers in many ways can feel marginalized
Yeah.
for a whole variety of reasons, and some of that may be because of No Child Left Behind and some of those unintended consequences. Talk about the time taken away from their classes to prepare for tests, limited resources, and just a whole list of other issues. What's your message to those teachers to say, your subject area is valuable without kind of putting words in your mouth that I just kind of did?
No, your subject area is valuable, absolutely. I think first and foremost, understanding now that we're looking at school success much more holistically, now that we're engaging in a real discussion around multiple pathways to success and graduation. That starts in kindergarten. They're a big part of that. I mean, we understand, that for so long we've been focusing, solely on traditional, content area, math, reading, writing, the sciences, and they're still important. But now that we're looking at, not only the academic growth, but the social-emotional growth of students, now that we're looking at student and family engagement, now that we're looking at engaging in multiple pathways, we fully embrace the understanding that it takes a full educational community, it takes a full community, to educate a child. And they're an important part of that community. It's very interesting, I think, in the traditional setting, arts teachers, humanity teachers can feel, somewhat, marginalized. It's true, and we've engaged in conversations like that, with a number of educators. But, once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times a year, they're the superstars of their community, right? Because parents see their children up on that stage and sometimes engaging in an opportunity that parents could never have dreamed either they or they themselves would be engaging in. So I think, can you imagine if we just package that feeling, that opportunity, that experience into all things throughout the school year? And I think that's the opportunity that's created by engaging in multiple pathways. So I guess my message would be, know that you are valued. I mean, as a parent, I absolutely see the value of art and music education to my children. As an educator, I've seen the value of my colleagues teaching those subject areas in my school and in my district. And as secretary, I can share that, this is a time where we're looking at education much more holistically, and they are a significant part, an integral role of our learning community.
Last question. Can you give a message to arts educators and music educators out there watching this, kind of a back-to-school message as they go into the year?
Yeah. So as a back-to-school message, and maybe I can look at the camera for this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
As a back-to-school message, if today's the first day of school, it's very likely that you've already spent 1 or 2 weeks in school helping prepare and engage students over the summer for the start of the school year. And for that, I say thank you. And I also thank you for your continuous efforts, your continuous advocacy of your trade, of your passion, and all that you instill in our children. Have a great school year.
Secretary Rivera, thank you so much
pleasure.
for joining us, and I wish you the best of luck with in your position here, but also with your 2 aspiring drummers at home. You're in for many years of entertainment, so we can get you some earplugs to maybe tone it down a little as their skills develop.
Yeah, I'm good with the earplugs, but
enough.
Hopefully they improve.
Fair enough. Again, thank you for joining us, and we encourage you, if you're watching this, visit PDE's website, education.pa.gov, especially on the ESSA implementation. Tons of stuff there. Visit PMEA.net as well. We have a lot of music and arts education related advocacy things there for you as well. Thanks for watching today.